My name is Isabel. For the last year, I've been living in a house of ghosts. Not the kind that rattle chains or whisper in the walls, but the quieter, more insidious kind, the ghost of a shared laugh in an empty kitchen, the phantom weight of a hand on my shoulder, the lingering scent of sawdust and coffee that I can no longer place. The most shocking thing about grief is not the loud, shattering pain of the loss itself, but the profound, echoing silence that comes after. It's a silence that can deafen you. And in that deafness, you begin to listen for any sound, any presence that can make you feel real again. Welcome to Echoes of the Heart. We believe that our greatest stories are not about how we fall, but about how we learn to stand up again in the quiet aftermath. If you find solace in narratives of healing and the complex, unexpected ways we rediscover ourselves, I invite you to subscribe. The story I am about to share is about how, in the process of packing up a life that had ended, I found a connection that was just beginning, a connection so gentle and so terrifying, it threatened to undo me all over again. My husband Daniel died of an illness that took him piece by piece over 2 long years. His death, when it finally came, felt less like a sudden impact and more like the final quiet exhale at the end of a marathon we had both been forced to run. Now, a year later, I was faced with the final task, packing up our lakeside cabin in the Pacific Northwest, the place where we had spent our best years, the place that held the last most vibrant echoes of the man he used to be. My son Noah had come home from his life in the city to help. At 22, he was a man I was still getting to know. The boy I had raised had been eclipsed during his college years by a quieter, more thoughtful individual, one who carried a gentle gravity that reminded me so much of his father before the illness. His presence in the cabin was both a comfort and a constant aching reminder of the trio we once were. The cabin was nestled amongst towering pine trees, its large windows looking out over a lake that was often shrouded in a soft, moody mist. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Inside, everything was as Daniel had left it. His woodworking tools were arranged neatly on the wall of his workshop, a half-finished birdhouse still resting on the bench. His favorite flannel shirt was draped over the back of a worn leather armchair by the fireplace. Each object was a landmine of memory, and I spent the first few days moving through the space like a trespasser in my own past. Noah was patient. He moved with a quiet efficiency, sorting books and packing dishes, never pushing me, never rushing. He seemed to understand that I was not just packing boxes, but closing a chapter of my soul. It was on the 3rd day that something shifted. The morning was unusually still, the lake, a sheet of smoky gray glass beneath a low-hanging fog. "Let's take the boat out," Noah suggested, his voice soft in the quiet kitchen. "One last time." I hesitated. The old wooden rowboat had been his father's pride and joy. We hadn't used it since he'd gotten sick. But the look in Noah's eyes was one of gentle pleading, a shared need to perform this one last ritual. I agreed. Out on the water, the silence was absolute. The shore disappeared behind us, swallowed by the thick white mist. It felt as though we were the only 2 people left in the world, floating in a boat, suspended between water and sky. The rhythmic creak of the oarlocks was the only sound. "I remember when Dad tried to teach me how to fish out here," Noah said, his voice a low murmur that didn't disturb the stillness. I was probably 10. I was more interested in skipping stones. I smiled at the memory. "He was so determined to make you a fisherman. He spent an hour baiting your hook for you, and I still managed to get the line tangled in a tree on my first cast." He finished, a soft laugh in his voice. We fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the warmth of a shared memory, a small pocket of light in the gray mist. The air grew colder as the fog thickened around us. I shivered, pulling my thin sweater tighter. Without a word, Noah stopped rowing and reached for the old wool blanket we always kept stowed under the seat. He unfolded it and draped it around my shoulders, his fingers brushing against my neck. The touch was brief, innocent, yet it sent a strange, unexpected jolt through me. "Better?" he asked. I just nodded, unable to speak, my throat suddenly tight. I was acutely aware of him sitting so close in the small boat, his knee occasionally brushing against mine. The fog had created an unnerving intimacy, shrinking our world down to the few feet of weathered wood that kept us afloat. I felt him shift beside me, and then his arm was around my shoulders, pulling me slightly closer, a simple gesture of shared warmth against the chill. I leaned into him, telling myself it was just the cold. But as my head rested on his shoulder, the gesture felt both deeply familiar and utterly new. This was the same shoulder I had leaned on for comfort after the funeral. But today, it didn't feel like the comfort of a son. It felt like the steady, solid presence of a man. And that simple, terrifying distinction made the world tilt on its axis. The next few days were spent in the heart of the house, sorting through Daniel's workshop. The room was a sanctuary of his memory, filled with the scent of cedar and oil. We moved through the space with a quiet reverence, our hands touching the tools his hands had held, our conversation a low murmur of reminiscence. Noah would pick up a half-carved decoy and remember the story behind it. I would find a piece of wood, its grain worn smooth from sanding, and recall the afternoon Daniel had spent working on it. We were not just sorting objects. We were sorting through the man we had both loved, trying to piece together the happy memories to hold against the more recent painful ones of his illness. At one point, Noah found a small locked wooden box on a high shelf. "I remember this," he said, turning it over in his hands. "Dad always said it was where he kept his treasures." I found the small key we kept hidden in a jar of old nails. Inside the box, there were no jewels or valuables. There were old photographs of me from when we were first dating. There were ticket stubs from movies we'd seen, a dried flower from our wedding, and a stack of small folded notes. They were letters Daniel had written to me over the years, short missives left on my pillow or tucked into my coat pocket. "Saw this and thought of your smile. Thank you for being my anchor. I love you more than words." Tears welled in my eyes as I read them, my hand trembling slightly. These were echoes from a man I had almost forgotten, the vibrant, romantic man from before the sickness had slowly eroded him. Noah watched me, his expression full of a deep, empathetic sadness. He didn't try to comfort me with platitudes. He just sat with me in my grief, his silent presence a greater comfort than any words could have been. "He was a good man," Noah said quietly. "He was," I whispered, folding one of the notes and clutching it in my hand. That evening, a storm rolled in off the lake, the wind howling around the eaves of the cabin, the rain lashing against the windows. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging us into a sudden deep darkness. "Well," Noah's voice came from across the living room, calm and steady. "Looks like it's a fireplace and candles kind of night." He moved with a familiar ease in the dark, finding the emergency candles and matches. Soon a fire was crackling in the large stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light across the room and chasing the chill from the corners. We sat on the floor in front of it, on the large braided rug, mugs of tea warming our hands. The storm outside felt like a distant, angry sea, but inside our small bubble of firelight, it was peaceful. "This feels like when I was a kid," Noah said, his gaze on the flames. "Remember when the power would go out in the winter, and we'd build a fort in here and tell ghost stories?" I smiled. "I remember you being too scared to sleep afterwards, and ending up in our bed between me and your dad." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "He always snored so loud." He did. I agreed, a fond ache in my chest. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while, just watching the fire. The flickering light softened the lines on his face, making him look both younger and older at the same time. "You know," he said, turning to look at me, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about what you found today. Those notes." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I mostly remember him as he was at the end, tired, in pain. I'd almost forgotten the man who wrote those letters, the man who looked at you like you were the only person in the room. My breath caught. He had seen it too. "I see that person in you sometimes," he continued, his voice barely a whisper now. "The woman from the photographs, the one who laughs without holding anything back. I see her under all the sadness." Tears I hadn't realized were forming began to spill down my cheeks, silvered by the firelight. It was the most beautiful, painful thing anyone had said to me in years. He didn't try to hug me or offer a tissue. He simply reached out, his touch impossibly gentle, and brushed a tear from my cheek with the pad of his thumb. His fingers lingered for a moment, the warmth of his skin against mine, a stark, shocking contrast to the cold loneliness I had grown so accustomed to. The world around us seemed to fade away. There was no past, no future. Just the crackle of the fire, the sound of the rain, and the weight of his gaze. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild, chaotic rhythm. He was so close. The air between us was thick with unspoken emotions, with a profound, aching tenderness that was both a comfort and a terror. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own confusion, my own longing. He started to lean in, a slow, hesitant movement, a question being asked without words, and I knew in that heart-stopping moment that if I didn't move, if I didn't breathe, he would kiss me. And I knew with an even more terrifying certainty that I wanted him to. But as his lips neared mine, an image flashed in my mind, Daniel smiling, handing me one of those silly, heartfelt notes. I pulled back. It was a small movement, a slight turn of my head, but it felt like a seismic shift. The spell was broken. I saw a flicker of hurt, of confusion in Noah's eyes before he masked it, pulling his own hand back as if he'd been burned. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I shouldn't have." "It's okay," I said, my own voice unsteady. "It's just a lot." We sat there for a long time after that, the silence between us no longer comfortable but filled with the raw, vibrating energy of what had almost happened. We had stood at the very edge of a precipice, looked down into the beautiful, terrifying canyon below, and had at the last possible second taken a step back. The next few days were a study in careful navigation. We moved around each other with a new, tender awareness. We didn't talk about the moment by the fire, but it was there in every shared glance, in the way we were careful not to let our hands brush when passing in the hallway. We finished packing the last of the boxes, taping them shut, labeling them with a black marker kitchen, books, photos. Each box felt like a small coffin for a piece of our past. The night before we were due to leave to hand the keys over to the realtor, we stood on the deck overlooking the lake. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and crisp. The sky was a vast, dark blanket strewn with an impossible number of stars. "I'm going to miss this place," Noah said quietly. "Me too," I replied. He turned to me, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. "What you said the other night, about being seen." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Thank you for seeing me too. Not just as a kid or as Dad's son, but just me." "You're easy to see, Noah," I said, and my voice was steady. He gave me a small, sad smile. I think I need to figure out who that person is on my own. Away from here. Away from all these ghosts." I understood. He wasn't running away from me. He was running toward himself. The quiet, gentle connection we had forged was a bridge out of his grief, but he couldn't live on the bridge forever. And neither could I. "I know," I said, "and you'll be wonderful." He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. It was different from all the other hugs we had ever shared. It was a hug between two equals, two survivors. It was filled with love, yes, but also with a profound unspoken goodbye. It was an acknowledgement of what had passed between us and a mutual silent promise to cherish it and let it go. The next morning, we locked the cabin door for the last time. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I looked forward at the road ahead, feeling a strange mix of deep sorrow and a quiet, unfamiliar lightness. The silence in the car was not empty. It was peaceful. We had entered that house as a grieving mother and a grieving son bound by a shared loss. We were leaving it as two separate people, Isabel and Noah each, with our own path to walk, our own lives to build. The connection we found in that misty, isolated cabin was a rare, delicate thing. It was a testament to the way the human heart, in its desperate search for healing, can find solace in the most unexpected places. It wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. It was quieter, more complex. It was a story of two people who saw the broken pieces in each other and instead of trying to fix them, simply sat with them in the dark until the sun came up again. And that I've learned is its own kind of love. A love that knows when to hold on and when, for the sake of everything sacred, to let go.